So here I am in SketchUp, and I quite like messing about in SketchUp, but I just haven't spent enough time taking it seriously. So I'm a complete newbie, and I've just been messing about today. And I've got this block here, you see, and I've left Helen in here as a reference. She appears to be about 1.6 metres tall, roughly speaking. Anyway, the only other thing I've got on this desolate landscape is this block, which measures 100 centimetres squared. So that's a million square centimetres, right? And right, I've got to try and navigate here, and I left this notch out. See, look, I've got this little bit here, and this thing is 100 centimetres wide, and it's 4 centimetres wide, centimetre deep. So that's 400 square centimetres. So you know what that is? That's that represents the CO2 in the atmosphere. So for every million parts, we've got 400 parts of CO2. So that sort of scales it a bit, right? That's roughly what we're told by NASA, etc. That's what there is lingering in the atmosphere. And just for comparison, this strip here is just a smaller one. Which is sort of a bit less, a bit going back a few years, apparently, when there wasn't quite so much CO2 in the atmosphere. I don't know. I don't know what is actually supposed to be the normal amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. But if this is from a previous era, then we've got sort of this much extra, apparently, which is causing the planet to about to die within the next dozen years. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the carbon that I emit. I'm not sure, I have no idea of my carbon footprint. Yeah, I suppose I'm constantly coming into contact with plastic. But rest assured, I personally don't dump any of it in the oceans. I put it in the supplied receptacles. I don't know quite how any of my empty packages ends up in some ocean somewhere. All I know is I'm not doing it. So presumably the people that run the boats backwards and forwards, I don't know, maybe they just need to try and be a bit more careful. Okay, anyway, let's look at car emissions. Now, I drive a crappy old Peugeot 407. This is not actually my car, this is just represented, although my car's black. Now, I think it looks quite nice still. But it is an old diesel, right? And I've had it for years. I'm not in the habit of replacing my car very often, so I carry on using it, right? And what I would say is that I don't use it very much. I only bother going out in it a couple of times a week, so it sits there for the most part in the parking space, and a tank of diesel lasts me for months. So maybe that mitigates my guilt for having a vehicle. Now, of course, cars are dirty, right? Dirty. They spew horrid stuff into the atmosphere. You wouldn't want to park yourself next to an exhaust for too long, would you? Right? Because of the poisonous fumes they emit. Now, here we have the Automobile Association website, the AA of the UK, and this page, car choice impacts your green score and your cash, right? So this page tells us what stuff comes out of your car. Exhaust emissions. In theory, you should be able to burn a hydrocarbon fuel, petrol, diesel, gas, etc., with air in an engine to produce just carbon dioxide and water. Oh dear, carbon dioxide. The rest of the exhaust would be nitrogen that came in with the air. Unfortunately, the fuels we burn are made up of hundreds of differently structured hydrocarbons that burn in different ways. Yeah, so let's hang on, it's going on about CO2 again. The amount of carbon dioxide produced is directly related to fuel consumption, which is why car manufacturers have done a lot to improve new car fuel economy. Okay, so what's in your exhaust? Okay, here we come to the... and this is going to make me feel bad, right? Because, you know, when I go and do my shopping or whatever, I'm sorry, I can't always get on a bike and do it, right? Get on my bicycle. So sometimes I do have to use the car, okay? And look at all these horrible things. Let's start from the bottom, shall we? Right? It produces soot, benzene, hydrocarbon. Now that's nasty, right? It causes breathing problems, increased symptoms in those in asthma. Benzene is carcinogenic, toxic and carcinogenic. Leukemia, disgusting emissions, right? Sulfur dioxide, acid rain, ozone, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, inflammation of the airways, reduced lung function and asthma. Carbon monoxide, deadly, of course, absolutely deadly. You know, we should all have carbon monoxide detectors in our house particularly if we're using gas, right? Okay. However, we come to the top here and we've got nitrogen, no adverse effects, oxygen, no adverse effects, water, no adverse effects, carbon dioxide, non-toxic. What they mean is no adverse effects. Right, okay. Non-toxic, but contributes toward acidification of our oceans, and one of the most important greenhouse gases. So government policies around the world are aimed at reducing CO2 emissions to combat global warming. Right, okay, so let's... I wish my car didn't produce these hideous stuff, these hideous things down here, but there's not much I can do about that. I would like to get an electric car. I do like the fact that they're quieter, cleaner, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That's not practical for me at the moment. The UK government website has some details about how to... It has a website where you can find details about your CO2 emissions, and for a Peugeot 407, this is my model. It emits 155. 155 watt. I don't know what that is. I can only guess it means 155 parts per million. I don't know. If it's 155 parts per million, then I suppose that's not bad. I'm going to assume that's pretty average. But again, it doesn't really tell me. So, anyway, that's that. There's another website here, Emissions Finder, which puts things in a slightly different way. It says CO2 emissions. Notice this is in bold. I mean, it seems to suggest that the CO2 emissions are more critical than the CO emissions. I mean, this stuff kills you, right? If you breathe this in too much, right? CO2 is not quite so lethal to people. And it says here 159 grams per kilometre. Maybe that's what that means. 155 grams per kilometre. Maybe. Similar numbers, aren't they? So in the UK, we have an annual MOT test for vehicles, Ministry of Transport test. And from the official government website, there's this document that tells you what testing they do on emissions, okay? And somewhere down here, it basically says, you know, depending on the age of your car and all that, different kinds of tests. They do visual tests. But, right, standard emissions test, right? So, roughly speaking, after completing the visual test, the tester will use the analyzer to assess the concentration of carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons in the exhaust gases by inserting a sample probe into the exhaust tailpipe. And that's it, really. Yeah, so, you know, then it outlines the levels at which these emissions can be emitted, right? I think down here we've just got diesel engine cars. Doesn't really say any more than that. So then we've got this table, a long list of tables for cars. Right, and this just goes on. Anyway, the only reference that I could find in this document to carbon dioxide is right at the end on the last page. Yeah, last page. So after 243 pages, we come down here. Maintained for economy and to minimise emissions. Keep your car properly tuned and serviced. Keeping your car properly tuned and serviced reduces emissions and fuel consumption. Useful guidance may be found at the government's Act on CO2 website at this web address, which doesn't actually exist anymore. Maybe there's an alternative equivalent page somewhere else, but if you look that up, it says it's been archived. Anyway, this is the only mention of CO2 in the whole document. I also searched for dioxide, doesn't mention it, right? So basically, there's no testing done on British vehicles, as far as I can see, for carbon dioxide. So lovely carbon dioxide, you know, that stuff which greens our plants. So let's just come back to this page here, the AA page, which tells you what's in exhaust, right? It says nitrogen, no adverse effects; oxygen, no adverse effects; water, no adverse effects; carbon dioxide, non-toxic. So I think we just need to basically do this. And I think that's all I need to worry about, really. Okay, there you go.